Hello, and welcome to Metachemistry. This is episode 127, and we're here with a rules review episode, which is basically where we take some time to look at typically some sort of new rules or release for Infinity and kind of give our first impressions of those changes. And so, of course, this time it's going to be about ITS 17, the Seekers. And so, while we thought that we were going to see this earlier in the year, around the Krug or for the Krug, things didn't quite line up, but it's here now. And it's pretty exciting. There's some really big changes, and we're seeing almost. We're seeing a lot of missions cut out, but a lot of new missions filtered in. It's a smaller packet, but there's kind of a lot more meat on all of the missions, as it were. So, yeah, pretty exciting to see CB willing to change as much as they have for this season, because there's certainly a lot going on, and we'll be going kind of like a high-level overview. We'll speak to the missions briefly. I've had a chance to play several of them, but I haven't gotten through the whole packet just yet. But it's some pretty cool stuff. But before we get started, I just want to give a shout to Mo Games, sponsor of Metachemistry. And if you are a patron of any paid level, because we do have options for free memberships if you just want to keep tabs on what's going on. If you are a paid patron of any level, you can get a 10% discount to Mo Games' store, which you can find at mo-games.com. And otherwise, if you are just a member of our Discord, whether you're a patron or not, and select the Mo Giveaways role, you'll be entered in every month for a $40 coupon code that we raffle off to the community, courtesy of Mo Games. Because what's better than games? Mo Games. And so, for this episode, it is Ian and myself. Ian, we haven't had very much time to talk about what's been going on in our week-to-week lives, because we've had so many guests on lately. So,
yeah.
how are you?
It's been an ordeal lately. We've been shorthanded at work, so by the time this episode actually releases, maybe I'll get days off again. It'll be about 37 days consecutively to make things actually run. So, it is what it is, making it work. But still trying to make some time for some games here and there. We managed to get a bunch of us over the day before we're recording this. We actually got a bunch of us to sit down and play the old Battlestar Galactica board game, which is
Okay.
It's well, first off, I was shocked because I've owned this game since it released, and apparently it goes for major money now, like a full set with the 3 expansions. It goes for like $1,200 to $1,500 because out of print.
Wow.
Yeah,
Sure.
so I'm glad I have it, and I'm not giving it up. But it's everybody is trying to work together to survive to through the game, and secretly, depending on how many players there are, 1 to 3 of the players are actually
Cylons?
secretly bad guys. Yep, they're secretly Cylons and working against the group. And so there's a lot of paranoia and baseless accusations and stuff that happens, and it's pretty epic. So we had a ton of fun doing
Nice.
that. Outside of that, getting geared up for this ITS season with our poll going for what I'm playing this season. So should be wrapped up about the time the episode airs. So we'll definitely be posting that in the Discord to let everybody know what I'll be playing. And we got a Warcrow tournament coming up, so that's going to be a lot of fun as well. But looks like I have to play the CNN Elves because nobody else signed up for that. Cowards. I guess I'll just do. I'll do the thing.
I wouldn't associate cowardice with not playing the elves. The elves seem pretty cowardly from what I've seen.
No, that's fine. But since nobody's going to play them and everybody's got to go with the easy choices and we're going to play the boring stuff, which actually there is nothing boring in Warcrow. It's a ton of fun with all the factions. But I'm going to play the faction that nobody else is playing for balance.
I see. Yeah, I've played against Cianon once, and it was pretty rough. It didn't feel like there was a whole lot of interaction. It was just kind
Hmm.
of, I'm going to pop up wherever I feel like. I'm going to eliminate these units without them being able to attack. I'm going to see things when you can't see me back, and things along those lines. But I know some of that has been changed with some of the
Yeah.
rules updates, like taking out Dadak was a big one. Because
Yep. And
Dadak being able to double shoot was
you know,
pretty
just
egregious.
don't have forests on the table, and it's fine. They don't get to do anything if they don't have forests.
Well, they can automatically bring forest with a druid, and
Yeah, but only one.
you
They
have
can only bring
to.
one.
Yeah, but you have to. Each player is placing terrain, and so
Not in a tournament setting.
that's fair. That's fair. But then it's just kind of the whim of the board, so it's just however
Yeah,
things are set up there. But
exactly.
I was playing a friendly game, and so it was all right.
Friendly,
Well, I'll
quote
place.
unquote.
I mean, there's that. I'll place some ruins. Place a forest. I'll place a wall. Here's a forest. I'll place a fence. Here's a forest. I'm like, I don't want to place anymore. All right. My last thing will be a forest. Like,
Yeah.
great.
Oh, and
Also,
then
I
I'm going to
start with
place
the
the
forest.
forest because of this
Yeah,
guy. Yeah.
exactly. So I'm like, well, that sucks. Uh,
Yeah.
but yeah, so, and that was before the Song of the Dormant release as well. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there's
And it
other
was
stuff.
the only stuff at that point was the actual battle pack for them. So they've had a few releases since then. So now there's actually a little more variety in their builds. So it'll be
Mhm.
fun. I'm excited for it because I've not gotten those to the particular ones to the table yet. So this will be the opportunity. All because
Nice.
nobody else wants to play them.
Yeah, and for me, I've been focusing on Infinity, though I've gotten a little bit of work row in with the Scions, but mostly small games and demos, which is like the main line of what Scions have. And I know several people that are in my immediate area are looking to try it out, so I'm letting people use the little bit of Feudum stuff that also comes from that pack. So we're not really playing full size games yet anyway. But otherwise, I've been trying to cram in a bunch of season 17 missions. So it's been out as of recording for a couple weeks and I think 3 weeks. And so I've gotten in games of 4 different missions so far. Did
Mhm.
Crucial Intervention or Critical Intervention, Hardlock, Zone of Interest, and Crossing Lines are the ones I've played so far. And that's been kind of a mix of things. Like I've been playing a bit of Tunguska, and then with the sectorals returning, I've played a little bit of Neoterra, which has been fun. I've rotated Kestrel out of my bag for the Neoterra to come in,
Yay.
since that's kind of what I picked up Kestrel to do for me, was to to scratch that itch of Neoterra. Now Neoterra is a fair bit different. We'll dive more into those in other episodes, I'm sure, but it has been really interesting. It's kind of funny because looking at my bag, my current rotation is Tunguska, OSS, and Neoterra. And because of some of the changes to Neoterra, it really feels like, do you want to play against my hacking faction, or my hacking faction, or my hacking faction? Now, there's obviously more nuance to it than that, but it definitely feels like, okay, these all can spec pretty hard into InfoWar if they want,
That's
which is
neat.
kind of fun because I do like that. I enjoy hacking. That's a very prominent part of the game for me. But it is a little weird. Like, I
Mhm.
guess I have a type. So yeah, ITS 17. So Seekers is out and has been out for a little bit now. By the time of release, probably about a month or so, or about a month and just over. And so the first big thing that you'll see from, just the table of contents is that the mission lineup has been cut practically in half. Direct action missions effectively haven't been changed. There might be some minor tweaks, but I haven't looked at those too closely, to be honest. But those are the same direct action missions from previous seasons. And in case you weren't aware, direct action missions are basically kind of simplified versions of missions to a degree. You don't need HVTs, you don't need classifieds, and it just kind of streamlines the elements of those missions a bit and shakes them up slightly. But they're usually going to be a play on a previously existing mission with
Yeah.
some minor changes. But instead of 20 other missions, we now have 10 other missions, which means there's been a huge culling of missions and that there are 7 new missions out of these 10. There's a huge influx of new missions. Typically, we're looking at 2 or 3 missions a season. And so this has been a really big shakeup, I feel like.
Yeah, I agree.
Now, we do have, that leaves us 3 returning missions, which are Bpong, Evacuation, and Last Launch. And those have changed a little bit. But before we get into those, I want to talk about the new season rule and also kind of a half new rule, but I imagine this will be continuing going forward past season 17. But with 16 rotating out, we lose border skirmishers, which was the extra freedom of airborne deployment, deploying on exclusion zones up to 1 unit per game. And we lose stealth ops, which was picking a unit to gain stealth and silence pistol, I think it was. Stealth was always the important part, but I think it was a silence pistol was the other bonus.
It was.
So those are out, and instead we see treasure hunters. And so this is kind of a 3-part rule, more or less. You first off see that every faction has access to a sacha, or a seeker. These are your treasure hunters. They are going out to try and find these artifacts. And so currently, every faction can bring one of these. AVA might be higher for some of the what'll be the native factions, but I haven't noticed that too terribly closely.
But notably, in contrast to previous seasons with a season-specific model like this, these are not free. You do still have to pay points for them as part of your list.
Yeah, which is notable. I like that it is a choice. So you don't need to bring them, but you do have the option, and there is some incentive to bring them.
Mhm.
But let's actually, Ian, do you want to go over their profile real briefly? I know their US Ariadna has a slightly varied profile, but otherwise I think they're the same everywhere else.
Yes. So the Sacha is a 6-point irregular model. It's move 4/4, CC of 17, BS 11, Fizz 12, Whip 13, 0 armor, 3 BTS, 1 vitality, and silhouette 2. They have booty, climbing plus, forward deployment plus 4 inches, specialist operative, and terrain total. And for equipment, they have flash pulse, EM grenades plus 1 burst, stun pistol plus 1 burst, and a CC weapon, which is pretty neat for, they're very defensive, but that booty, they could get something lethal, which is fantastic. The US Ariadna version is 2 more points at 8 points, and it picks up a disco baller in addition.
Yeah, which is really interesting for US Ariadna because they're, just like any other Ariadna, I don't think disco ballers have filtered into Ariadna. Well, actually, with the sectoral update, I think some war drivers picked up disco baller.
Yes.
But generally speaking, Ariadna hasn't had access to Eclipse ammo prior to this.
No, they have
But
not.
Yeah, it's an interesting profile. I haven't been taking it personally, but it's one of those things where sometimes it's just going to do something really interesting.
Yeah. So
And you're
basically,
going to get a cool booty roll.
Yeah, basically what this is that it's the Xenotech from like season, I think it was 11, but now it's a model with a profile instead of a token that you're dragging around. So it's kind of cool. I like it a lot.
Yeah, because the second part of Treasure Hunters is that you get another game element added to each mission. Actually, there's at least one mission that says you don't deploy HVTs or treasure tokens, but barring that, You can deploy a treasure token. Essentially, it follows the same rules as deploying an HVT, and you can choose to secure treasure under the same circumstances. If you're within zone of control of the enemies and they are not within zone of control of yours, then you can secure treasure. Note that you can't both secure treasure and secure HVT. You can only replace one classified with either. So that is notable. The Sacha is able to secure enemy treasure even if the opponent is around your treasure. So
Yes.
she kind of trumps non-Sachas.
And the Sacha gets the open treasure skill and can gain a piece of equipment off of the booty chart from a treasure token, which does not prevent you from also securing it.
Right. And that means you can also deploy, you can effectively deploy touching your treasure or, the minimum distance apart, rather.
Yep.
And you can open your own treasure and grab
And you can
something
open
and get
the
a second booty
opponent's.
roll.
You can
And
get
then, yeah,
3.
exactly. So you could grab all kinds of gear during this season, which is kind of fun. So, yeah, acting as effectively a panoply for the Sacha is kind of the last portion of Treasure Hunters. So there's a fair amount wrapped up in this, mostly if you are bringing Sachas in your list or a Sacha in your list.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of the season rule instead of boosting any particular unit type or skill or similar. That's what we're seeing in lieu of that.
Yeah. We do get the standard long service. So characters have veteran classification for classified purposes, but that's
Sure,
also been around for
a long
every
time.
season that I can really remember.
Yeah, it's been around for a bit for sure.
Yeah.
So I think a next place that we want to stop is on returning missions, not the direct action missions. We're not going to really dive into those. Those are kind of a separate category, and just overall, I don't think they've changed very much from the cursory glance that I gave them. But the 3 missions that are coming back from previous seasons are Bpong, Evacuation, and Last Launch. And there haven't been a tremendous number of changes with these, but there have been some that I find pretty notable, except for Last Launch. Last Launch doesn't appear to have any real changes. And Bpong, it clarified the deployment zone to 16 inches. There was some contention there where the text in the chart was different than the image of the map. And so now it's been clarified that it is, in fact, 16 inches. And then the other change is that this has reverted the kind of reported change from Heloise saying that when you relocate a beacon, you can put it within 4 of the trooper. Now it is in 17. It's been kind of what I think most people expected it to be, which is you can relocate the beacon within 4 inches of where the beacon was, not 4 inches of where the trooper is. So you're not getting, a 10-inch super jumping Garuda that moves the beacon, 14, 15 inches away from where it was potentially.
Yeah.
So none of that. That's all gone. And then evacuation. The main thing that changed there was the scoring, where evacuation is you're trying to grab civilians and take them to the evac point. It changed from snagging the 2 enemy HVTs. They're now each worth 1 objective instead of 2, and now your classifieds are worth 2 instead of 1. So you can get a little bit more consistency that way, doing your classifieds as opposed to getting the enemy HVTs out, which can sometimes be tricky to do depending on the board.
Yeah, for sure.
And then the other thing that I think is pretty notable is that specialist bonuses are gone. So there's no longer extra +3 whip and an extra burst to various scenario skills. And in its stead, we're seeing operational learning. And Ian, do you want to break that down for us?
Yeah, so operational learning is actually a pretty cool addition And how it works is that instead of getting the whip bonus and rolling 2 times for a certain type of specialist to do an objective, how this works is that if a specialist is performing a skill with the scenario label, so one of the mission skills that you use to do things or score points, that requires a whip roll and they fail, then they can get bonuses the next order spent to do that mission objective skill. And it's actually like super neat because some of the missions have like a penalty. And so this helps negate that or give a bonus, because I don't know about everyone else, but I've had games where I failed, 7 or 8 whip rolls in a row, and it kind of is unfortunate and frustrating.
It's rough.
Yep. So how this works is that if you fail, the same trooper uses another order to do it. They get a +3 to the whip roll. And then if they fail and they spend another order to do it a third time, and this is any other attempts past that as well, they get a +3 and a special die to the whip roll. So you get really, that's where you're getting your extra rolls from and your bonuses, but you kind of have to build up to it. But it's any specialist, not just that specific type of specialist. And those mods are cumulative with any other mod that applies to skills with a scenario label. Now, the important things on this is that the mods are only applied to rolls that are made by consecutive orders on the same trooper for the same scenario skill with the same target. So if you pass the roll, the sequence will reset. If you don't declare that scenario skill, the sequence resets. If the trooper declares the same skill but on a different target, the sequence will reset. If the order is spent on any other trooper, the sequence resets. And only one sequence can be applied per trooper per scenario skill at a time. So this does force you to, if you want those bonuses, keep spending orders on the same guy in a row on the same objective. Which makes sense. You kind of have to be in a good spot to keep doing that without just taking repeated arrows, unless you're really good at tanking things. But I like that this is a thing because it broadens the amount of specialists that can get bonuses for doing the mission objectives, while not just having it be a gimme for all specialists. Like you gotta build it up.
Yeah, I am a little torn on it. I do think that it is overall good to have. And I like the idea that it's like, hey, if you are largely able to do this uncontested, then it's going to get progressively easier to a point
Yeah.
to accomplish that objective. And that's great, so that you're not spending, you're almost certainly not going to be spending 7 or 8 orders doing whatever the thing is, which is nice.
Yeah, but the thing for me is it's like you basically have to fail twice. You have to try 3 times in order to get the bonus that you had for specific objectives specialists before, which was almost always an auto succeed when you have like 2 dice rolling against a 16 in most cases.
That's probably true for factions you play.
Yeah, well, not all of us play Whip 15 robots. So, but again, for 2 dice on 16s, it being probably the average for that roll, it very much was nearly an auto success. Very rarely were they both be failed, but this allows you to still get to that, but with anybody, just not immediately.
Right, and I like the idea of having specialist bonuses. One, because it helps enhance the narrative of the mission to a degree. And 2, that it gives you some incentives in your list building. But I understand that not all these tools are divided in an equal manner, and the bonuses were not very well distributed. I don't know the exact math offhand, but it was weighted towards hackers
Mm-hmm.
pretty heavily, and then I think engineers next, and usually it was engineer or hacker uh, in the cases where you have engineer at all, and
Yeah,
then medical staff was just supplies, I think.
and then maybe a forward observe.
Yeah, and then a forward observer, which even that was just a recent change with provisioning.
Yep,
So yeah, I mean these things were. I think there was a chain of command one somewhere, but
there was a
anyway,
chain of command one, and I don't remember what mission had it, but there was one.
yeah, and so the bonuses are not very well distributed. The tools to receive said bonuses are not very well distributed. Um, like again, Ariadna, for instance, like okay, well, I don't get this unless I bring a war driver. Would be a common scenario.
Yeah, but
Like not
you
always.
should be bringing a war driver. But
Sure,
yes,
I
that
wouldn't
is.
know, but I believe you.
I mean, again, not all of us can be the most awesome faction and not need to have
It's true.
hacking devices.
Hmm. Well, if you say so.
We have APT2
Sounds
ammo.
well. That doesn't give you bonuses on the objective.
Yeah, sure it does because it keeps you off of it.
There we go. So yeah, so I think the operational learning is interesting. I like that. Obviously, it's going to be very. It's completely equal in terms of who gets it, obviously, but it's only in a handful of missions, which
Yeah.
is kind of interesting. It's only I want to say off the cuff, probably about half of the missions, roughly.
Mhm. And yeah, and a lot of those are the ones where the like provisioning where that scenario skill has a penalty on it. So kind of helpful there.
Just the one
Hmm.
to pick out of the enemy safe area, because you
Yep.
can still get the bonus to extract from the tech coffins,
Yes.
which doesn't have have a penalty rather. So with that, I mean, obviously, we have often dedicated an entire episode to a mission, and this is a bit different where we're going to go over these missions at a very high level overview just to kind of let you know what they're about, because we'll likely talk about these missions in detail at another time where
Hmm.
we can actually squeeze all of that in and not have this be, a 10-hour episode or
Yeah.
similar. So first off, we have, and we're going to go over the new missions because the last missions we already went over the changes, and so you've probably seen some of those before, and we're just going to skip those for now. But we do want to talk about the 7 new missions to this season. Actually, I suppose before we begin, just that there's no other caveats, we'll give a quick mention for resilience operations. There
Hmm.
was an update there. Luckily, this was in the change notes or the dev blog, where at the beginning of each round and just before the start of the game, you and your opponent each reveal one of your tactical objectives. So, of those 3 objectives that you keep, you reveal one each round. So that way there's a little bit more counterplay and you can't just say, surprise, I had these 3 zone controls and I happen to have a couple troops in the center and I hold the band and the corners and the circle in the middle and I win.
Yeah.
So that's kind of nice. I like that there is some interplay there. And I still kind of wish that something like counterintelligence or strategos or similar like command skills would play into that.
Hmm.
Like, you could either hide uh, a card, like not reveal until your second turn on, or with counterintelligence, you reveal an extra card or something like that would be
Hmm.
cool. But, we've talked about that when we went over ResOps a bit ago.
Well,
But that's
maybe,
the only other change there.
maybe eventually, but the star of
Someday.
this episode is going to be the new ones.
Exactly. So, with all of our edge cases aside, we'll start off with axial interference. And so axial interference is really interesting, and I'm probably going to say this about most of the new missions, honestly, because there's a lot
Mhm.
of kind of wacky things going on, a lot of things we haven't seen before, and I think it's a very exciting season because of that. And so for axial interference, the closest analog is going to be something like countermeasures. Effectively, players are drawing classifieds every turn, you're trying to complete those classifieds, but there is a console that lives in the center of the board, and you can use that console to either discard and draw new classifieds, and you can just keep doing that. Or as long as you're completing classifieds, you can, if you match a symbol on your classified, there it limits them. So there's the medical plus the gear engineering one, the globe, which I believe is usually hacking,
Mhm.
and the target, which is usually like the offensive ones, like
Mhm.
HVT assassination or similar, or I think extreme prejudice for killing enemies in melee. I think that's another one. But if you have one of those done and you match a symbol of one your opponent has done, or if they haven't done it yet, you can effectively take it off the board for them to be able to accomplish by interacting with the console or the antenna each round, up to once per round per trooper. So I guess you could pile on with specialists and really mess with your opponent's scoring, but I don't know how likely that'll be because you have to do a lot of classifieds for that to happen.
Yeah, and it's an interesting one just because you do that and you go, okay, and now you don't have that classified, so it can be very much a mess with your opponent's score, and then through the filtering where you can discard and draw new ones, you can also look at stuff where your opponent looks like they can get a few of these classifieds. They'll be kind of easy, and you just get rid of them and say, nope, we're not going
Mm-hmm.
to have that one. So yeah, I think it's really interesting take on countermeasures because it does operate very similarly. But the other main thing is that any of the missions that are in play can only be accomplished in the turn that they were revealed. You refresh every turn,
Mm-hmm.
so that's kind of cool. And anything that scores at like end of round or end of game does score at the end of player turn instead. So that's
Yeah.
another cool one.
Yeah, which is pretty significant. Like I feel like countermeasures allowed you to score end of game missions at end of round
Mm-hmm.
instead of end of, but not end of turn, if I recall.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's pretty interesting because that allows you a lot more freedom to score classifieds because you're looking at 6 of your points come from doing the common classifieds, 1 from doing more than your opponent, and 1 if you accomplish a common classified each round of the game, even if it has been canceled, it still counts for that last purpose. And then you have your private classified, which is worth the last 2 points. But
Yeah.
what's kind of interesting is that so each round, both players are drawing 2, picking 1 and discarding the other, and then reveal the one they're keeping. And you can have the same classified up twice.
Mm-hmm.
It just changes it so that you can't perform it either with the same trooper or against the same target. So if you're doing,
Yeah.
say, net undermine and you have to be a veteran, etc., across the halfway point, you can do it, but then somebody else has to do it. Or if you're doing an HVT classified, you'll have to target a different HVT because there are 4 per player, and those are
And
removed after each objective anyway.
yes.
So yeah, a lot of running around. It's one of those where, just like countermeasures, I mean, you have to have a fairly robust list to be able to get these classifieds with any consistency. So yeah, it's a pretty cool one. And then we have corporate appropriation. And this one's kind of interesting. I feel like this one is sort of another twist on capture and protect, but kind of in a very different way. Because both players have a prototype and they're sitting in the center of the field. And so there's 2 prototypes that are going to be on the across the center line of the board, and the player who is taking second initiative gets to pick which one is theirs and which one is their opponent's, and you'll have different objectives that you want to accomplish on yours versus theirs. And you're trying to destroy yours while capturing your opponents, and then ideally at the end of the game, holding it in your DZ. And then one thing that's kind of cool about this mission is there's a panoply touching the edge of your deployment zone. And so
Mhm.
you can deploy kind of just the minimum distance away, especially if there's some cover or what have you. And you can just immediately out the gate start off with a roll on the panoply chart. Or, if you have something like a Sacha or another unit with booty, you don't even have to make a roll. You just declare the skill and you get it. So there's potentially a lot of opportunity to run by with troops if you're willing to burn a short skill on the way to just start grabbing more equipment, which I think is really interesting. And this one, of course, has a bunch of classifieds. There are 3 classifieds worth a point apiece. And so you definitely, while none of the the main objectives require a specialist to perform, you'll probably want at least some so that you can kind of have a decent shot of getting some of those classifieds. Now, of course, you can in this season exchange a classified with either secure HVT or secure treasure, but you can't do both. So you're still going to need some stuff. So, Ian, do you want to talk about the prototypes a little bit? Because these are sort of like the consoles from looting and sabotaging, for instance, but not exactly the same.
So the 2 prototypes, they're along the center line inside of an exclusion zone, and they are kind of a combination of like the AC2 and the supply box. So in terms of that, depending on which one has been nominated as your box versus your opponent's box, um, the one that you're trying to destroy does have an automated defense system, which will trigger on anytime on a CC attack with a face-to-face roll against a automatic 8. And if you fail, then you take a saving roll against BTS at PS5, and your immunity, enhanced immunity BTS skills are not effective against the hit. You additionally do not get any mods to your CC attribute in that face-to-face roll. When you're trying to destroy it, is armor 6, BTS 6, and 3 structure, and you have to go after it with a CC attack with anti-material trait, so DA, explosive, T2, or D charges. And yeah, once it hits 0, it's removed. Now, as far as the opponents that you're trying to capture, it's just getting a trooper into base-to-base contact with it and using the pickup prototype skill, which allows you to pick it up and it follows you around. And then if things are heavy though, so if you are carrying it,
You don't have baggage.
and you don't have baggage, you can only move once. You cannot declare move as your second basic short skill.
Yeah, that's pretty fun.
Yeah, so you're dragging this thing along. But then if you go down or whatever, it stays in that position until somebody else grabs it or your opponent destroys their box. So yeah, it's pretty interesting. Controlling it means that you have a model that's on a marker that's carrying it, but again, if you go down, it gets dropped there. Somebody else has to come grab it and pick it up. It's not just being in base contact. You do actually have to spend the short skill to pick it up.
Yeah, but notably, there's no roll, and you don't have to be a specialist, so it
Yep.
isn't terribly tricky, assuming you can avoid arrows. So yeah, kind of a fun mission. Yeah, what's kind of interesting about that prototype choice is mostly that I feel like it is terrain dependent, because everything's going to be largely equidistant.
Mm-hmm.
It's more about how easy is it to get to yours or one versus the other rather, and how well can it be defended. um, it is important to note that you can pick up a prototype on the first turn or the first round of the game, but you cannot attack or damage a prototype on the first round of the game.
Yeah.
So you're not going to lock in those destroyed prototype points, which are pretty significant. You get 3 points for destroying your prototype, whichever one you pick.
Yeah, and if your opponent doesn't or if you don't destroy yours, your opponent can engineer it to or Gizmo Kit it to increase its structure back up if it's still on the table.
Right? Yeah. What's interesting is that you don't get rerolls because it's not a profile with remote presence. So I just imagine a scenario where someone is desperate to save it and they accidentally remove the last point of structure and then it's gone.
Yeah. And it's
Okay.
Gizmo kitted on a fizz of 9 because it does not
Yeah.
natively have a fizz.
Yeah, which doesn't feel great. Like that's the worse than a coin flip is not really how you want to spend orders if you can help it.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it seems like an interesting mission. I think that it's got some kind of fun dynamicism there where you know your opponent is potentially trying to fix your prototype as they're running away with it and trying to sequester it in their DZ, and while you're chasing after them trying to blow it up, and vice versa. I think that there's a lot of AD troops that have decharges, and decharges,
Mhm.
whenever there's an ADS, decharges are your best friend because you
Yes.
don't have to worry about rolling, you don't have to worry about potentially getting stunned by the defense system and stuff like that. And there's plenty of combat jumpers that can do that. Now, note
Keeping
there
in mind the
is
exclusion zone.
exactly, yeah. The exclusion zone is there, but one thing that stands out kind of in a number of missions this season is that it's only 4 inches from the center line
Yeah.
instead of 8 inches from the center line. So it's half as long as it generally has been. So, yeah, I think that that'll be pretty interesting to see how much that matters. I do like that there is some pushback on infiltrating specialists, so you can't just start on the objectives.
Mm-hmm.
But when you have 8-inch deployment zones, it's like, okay, well, your infiltration's downgraded to 4 deployment 4 inches, unless you want to hop the exclusion zone and roll to the other side,
Yeah.
which doesn't feel great either. This feels like hopefully a nice middle ground where infiltration is better than forward deployment 4 inches, but it's not, oh, I can just start on the objective and, I'm already accomplishing things first order, which is theoretically still possible here, but is not likely, I don't think. Then we have critical intervention, and this one I think is really fun. This is one of the missions that I got a chance to play, and
I'm
this is the
excited
one
for
where,
this.
yeah, it's pretty sweet. It is similar to the armory in a way, where there is a central objective room, but this mission has an attacker role and a defender role. And so if you are the attacker, you're effectively trying to break into this objective room. Ideally, you want to activate a console that's on the opposite side from you to unlock the data pack. You want to steal the data pack and then get out of there with it. And then you want to keep that trooper alive because you cannot pass the data pack off. And then you want to dominate that objective room at the end of the game. But if you are the defender, you get points for keeping them from unlocking the data, keeping them from extracting the data, and you get points for killing the trooper if they did manage to take the data out. And then you also want to dominate the server room. And
And
then
the
there's a
data just
classified for defender.
disappears if whoever extracted it dies. It's just gone. It doesn't fall on the table. It's just gone.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty interesting to see where it can't be picked up later. But for scoring purposes, it makes sense. That way, you're not getting points every time you kill someone who picks it up. And it also just brings some finality to the game, which I think is good. Because
Mm-hmm.
what's kind of interesting is that a lot of these missions are fairly mutually exclusive scoring, but not so with corporate appropriation. You could actually both get um, you could both get an offensive bonus in in that mission, which
Mm-hmm.
I find funny. But with critical intervention, the attacker defender role is determined by initiative. So whoever goes first is going to be the attacker, and then whoever has second initiative is automatically the defender. And so that's kind of interesting because obviously there are things that are valuable for the attacker that are less valuable for the defender, and vice versa.
Yeah.
And so it's not quite so clear cut what to have in your list because you can't say that you're going to get a certain role. And so you kind of have to be flexible in your list building a little bit with that.
Mm-hmm. And I think it's a
So,
really cool mission, just because it is asymmetrical, and the good again that you have to plan for playing both roles, and so I think that's actually super
mhm.
cool. But then there's little wrinkles to it because the objective room has turrets inside, and the defender can spend a command token uh, before deployment to either have those turrets be active, which they can also activate it from the console outside the room
Mhm.
later in the game, or to ignore the deployment restrictions and put up to 65 points of guys in the room.
Yeah, which is really interesting. Like it's cool that like, hey, we are entrenched here. We have a position. This is our facility, and we're trying to keep you from extracting the data. And also, there is another exclusion zone. It's 4 inches on either side again instead of 8, but that only applies to the attacker, notably,
Yeah,
because defenders on their home turf, so they can already be in position, but they can't deploy inside the room unless they spend that command token to do so. Which, when I played this mission, I definitely spent the command token to do that.
I think why wouldn't you? Like if you can
Yeah,
activate the turrets with one order from a guy that's forward deployed or infiltrated outside the room, and then you also have 65 points of guys inside of it, like I don't see why you wouldn't.
it's that you won't have the turrets on during top of one no matter what unless you spend the command token.
And that's fair, but I think the guys in the room are gonna be more effective, and then you can turn the turrets on too.
I agree. I think that that's also the case. That's what I ended up doing.
Yeah,
Except I
especially if
actually
you have
never
like
turned on the
mine
turrets.
if you have like mine layer or anything else that you can get some extra stuff kind of guarding the doorways and things, like yeah, I think that's definitely the choice I would make.
Yeah, I agree. Like that definitely feels more valuable. And the turrets, they are combi rifle turrets. They're just armed turret combi rifles, so same
Mhm.
thing as if you were to drop one with an engineer. But yeah, it's interesting. I like that it is multi-staged. That's
Mhm.
kind of fun that there's things that you're trying to do, but it's not forced.
Yeah.
So, with unlocking the data, there's a console that's touching one of the corners opposite of the attacker. So, you have to get all the way to the other side of the room in order to unlock the data. And you do get points for that, or rather, you get a point for that.
Mhm.
But it also removes the -6 penalty to extract the data from the console that's in the center of that server room or the objective room.
Yeah.
So, that's pretty notable. And this mission does not have operational learning. So you're going to take that -6 unless you do the unlock first, which is pretty important. Now, when I played this, I was playing against Vanilla Combined with my Tunguska, and so it was a Karantid lieutenant. I was like, all right, well, I guess it's a coin flip whether or not I can get this data out. Like, uh, so that was pretty close. Uh, well, I say close. They got it on the first try,
Yeah.
but it didn't live. So
And yeah, and it
there
does
you go.
specified that there is one data pack, period. And if the model carrying it goes down, it's gone. Removed from
Yeah,
the game.
exactly. Then the attacker has effectively failed. The data was irrevocably damaged when the trooper went down. So there, the mission is a failure. Effectively,
Yep.
you only
I
get
think
a
this
couple
one
points for that.
I want to say right now, I think this one is my favorite of the new missions on paper because I haven't gotten to
Hmm.
play them yet. But on paper, I think this one is the most interesting one.
It is pretty cool. I would say of my several games of the new season, this was my favorite. It felt
Yeah.
tense the whole time. I obviously was the defender, and yeah, it was. It definitely felt like I was trying to hold back waves of aliens trying to take my stuff.
Yeah.
So that said, next we have crossing lines, and I know this one is kind of a strange one. And I think this is probably the most controversial mission of the packet. But
Hmm.
this mission is where you generally have a standardized deployment zone. You have 12 inches facing off against each other. But in the center, those 4 inches on either side of the line are also deployment zones of yours. Yours is going to be closer to your opponent's half, and theirs is going to be closer to your half. And then in that area, there's going to be a pair of antennas that you're trying to have activated at
Hmm.
the end of the game. But anything outside of your deployment zones, either player's deployment zones, are exclusion zones.
Yes.
So it makes things a little tricky in that regard, but also the fact that your opponent is deploying potentially 16 inches away from you, 20 inches away from you.
Yes.
It is a little frightening.
Yeah.
And I know
And
a lot of people are worried about it.
yeah, and they do specify, because of the exclusion zones and how the deployment is set up, that superior deployment, with the exception of impersonation, cannot be used at all. So no forward deployment, no infiltration, just impersonation if you want to go outside of your actual deployment zones. But you can get up to 75 points of troops in the strip in your opponent's half.
Yeah, exactly. So there is a limit, which helps. You can't just deploy as much stuff as you want there. There is a points cap. But this one is really, again, I say controversial is probably the best way to put it at the moment, because people are, and I think legitimately so, worried about alpha strikes coming from your opponent being on that zone and being able to dive into you right away.
Mhm.
And I think that it will vary from faction to faction as far as how dangerous or deadly that can be. I played this mission against Shizvasti, but there was no Shiskin. There were, what was it? It was an HMG Q drone on one side looking across the board. There was a Speculo killer, and there were a pair of seed soldiers.
Mhm.
Actually, I'm not even sure there was. Actually, the Speculo might have gotten into my DC. I forget which. But it was, I mean, the Speculo could just kind of do that anyway, so that's not extra scary in my mind.
Mhm.
And the others were mostly things just to kind of keep me in check. They weren't necessarily aggressive options
Yeah.
in my game. And so I think that could have been very different. But
But
you also have to be wary of what your opponent
mhm.
can put in there.
Yeah, and I feel like it's going to go one of two ways, since there's really only potentially 8 inches separating your deployment zone from your opponent's narrow strip, that they can either come right at you, or what I see is more likely is the two deployments in the center kind of have to duke it out at close range to see who survives, and then go after the other opponent, the other deployment zone, because it's, if you just go straight in, your opponent's going to do the same thing. So I feel like you kind of almost have to fight it out in the center to see who gets to. But the main objective here is actually not that; it's to dominate the exclusion zones in between the deployment areas.
Yeah, exactly. So it's kind of a weird version of quadrant control, I suppose. The fact that they're bands across the table remind me more of Frontline, but these are scored round over round, whereas Frontline is end of
Mhm.
game. So I suppose quadrant control is probably the closest analog. What's interesting is you can still use airborne deployment. Airborne
Mhm.
deployment is not a superior deployment ability,
Yeah,
but
but you can only go into your
it's
own. Well, you can only go into your own deployment zone with parachutist.
right. And what's interesting is that it's not very clear if the 75-point limit applies to things after the start of the game.
I wouldn't imagine
I
that they would, because that's not during the deployment phase.
Well, it says players may deploy up to 75 points of troops from their army list in their deployment zone within the central strip.
Yeah,
But it
during the
doesn't
deployment
necessarily
phase. airborne deployment is not deployed in that strip during the deployment phase.
Sure, but it doesn't mention deployment phase is the difference.
Okay, well, I mean, I still don't see how airborne deployment would ever get restricted from that after the game has started.
Yeah, and I think that that's something that really should be clarified because it's like, okay, well, do I have to also pay attention? Like, okay, well, I started with 45 points in there, so I can put up to 30 points of combat jumps or parachutists in there. I don't know. But
I feel like
obviously,
that
if
was
you
the intent, that they would have specifically spelled that out.
that's kind of my leaning as well. I feel like it makes more sense to not have to worry about that because you're not starting in the zone, and I think that's why there's a limit in the first place,
Mm-hmm.
is to kind of have some checks and balances as far as what actually sits in that zone. But yeah, that would be something that I would like to see some clarification on. And then we have Hardlock. And Hardlock is, I would say, more akin to Capture and Protect, like we had mentioned earlier. This one is where you have a beacon, again, touching the center and on the edge of each of your respective DZs, except there are 3 consoles spread evenly across the center, and you're trying to grab the enemy beacon, hold it round over round, and at the end of the game, hopefully have that beacon, and you also get points for activating more of those antennas and for each one you activate. So notably, the beacons are less than half of the points that you can
Mm-hmm.
accumulate in the game. I think it's 4. Yeah, 1 per round and 1.
Yep.
Actually, yeah, just 1 per round, and then you get a point if your opponent has not captured your beacon currently, or at the time the game ends.
Yes.
And then otherwise, you're getting 5 points off of antennas and then a point off of classified.
Mm-hmm.
So it's interesting because there is so much less impetus to get these beacons. Like, it's really 3 points you're giving up, and so you can still reasonably get those other 7 points without ever having to cross the center line of the table. And that was kind of my experience when playing Hardlock, was both
Mm-hmm.
of us were kind of prodding at each other and trying to get towards the other opponent, but we weren't making any major headway. And then the last turn I finally broke through. I managed to throw something onto the beacon to have it for 1 round at the end, and my beacon wasn't interacted with in the first place. And then I had 2 of the 3 antennas.
Mm-hmm.
So
I feel like this is
yeah,
really the most straightforward of the new missions. It's the one that has the most in common with like prior seasons missions as far as
mm-hmm.
how it's scored and set up. There's nothing in this that's out of the kind of the usual, unlike all the rest of the new missions where they're very new and different. Honestly, I think this is probably the simplest of all the missions in the packet that are not part of the direct action section.
Sure. Yeah, I think that's probably right. This one's probably the most straightforward, and I think that for gracious TOs that are trying to give their players a break, this is a good day 2 mission to have.
Yeah.
So, something that's a little bit lower on the mental overhead.
Yep.
But yeah, Hardlock is pretty interesting. I do like it. I think it's a fun mission, and I enjoyed playing it.
Yeah. And then we have provisioning. We already did an episode on this, so the only thing that's really changed is that instead of the forward observer bonus, now it has the operational learning skill or rule added to the mission, so anybody can do it with that escalating bonus. But yeah, that's the only real change. It's still the same old corner deployments and grabbing stuff, and I like the mission a lot, so I think we're
Yeah.
cool.
Yeah, I think provisioning's good. I think the most notable thing about the operational learning changeover is that it also applies to retrieving it from a safe area, whereas the forward observer bonus didn't apply to that. So that's kind of nice, because that was also the kind of tricky part anyway, where you could easily get stuck on that, kind of spinning your wheels if things weren't rolling your way.
Yeah.
And
Then
then
zone of
Zone of
interest.
Interest. Yeah,
It's
this one,
like provisioning, but different.
at least in deployment.
Yeah, it has corner deployments. You and your opponent place down 3 templates, and these are areas that you need to dominate over the course of the game. But one of them is in particular the zone of interest, and it doesn't have to be the center one. It could be, I mean, you place these anywhere, and one player places two and picks one that is the more important zone, and you're just looking to dominate those for points and more points for getting that particular one round after round.
Yeah, what's kind of interesting, I like that there's more interplay between your choices of initiative. So with this one, if you're going first, you get the special zone and a standard zone, and going second just gives you a standard zone.
Mm-hmm.
But that means that first player gets to kind of dictate engagements a little bit better, because second player is going to have so much more weight and so much more information when it comes to actually dominating these zones.
Yeah.
And so the special zone wants you want to hold that round over round, and the antenna that's in the center of the board you want to hold round over round. But then the secondary or the standard zones, those only matter at the very end of the game anyway.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Also, that provisioning and zone of interest have flip-flopped deployment zones. So you deploy
Provisioning's left and zone of interest is on the right.
which is kind of interesting if you want to throw both of these in a lineup for an event.
Mm-hmm.
You have to kind of check your tables fairly carefully. So something to watch out for, TOs, is make sure that all four of those semicircles actually have reasonable deployment zones when watching those. So yeah,
I'm excited
tricky
for the season though as a whole. I think that trimming it down to 10 missions was actually fantastic, because we ended up with 20 plus 5 direct action last season, and now we have 10 and 5 direct action. And I think that it did a good job. All the missions feel different. They don't have any that are overly similar to each other. Like, they all feel very different. And I think that's really cool, because you would end up with quadrant control and supremacy, and they're the same mission with some some very, very small changes as far as, these consoles are killing some stuff, but they're very much the same mission. And in this, nothing feels like it's very similar to something else, because even something as like Hardlock versus was it corporate interest
appropriation. Yeah,
corporate appropriation, where you both have a similar table setup and you're doing very different things. It's like you're destroying this and trying to capture the other versus just trying to capture something. Like, they feel very different. And I like that. There's nothing that's super similar. And I think that's going to be interesting for the Army List design space, because depending on what TOs were picking, there was a lot of missions that you can go, well, these are very similar, and I can run the same list because it'll tick the same boxes for this. And now I think that gets potentially a little bit harder to do, because the missions do have such a varying approach to how to accomplish them.
Yeah, especially after our last episode with Cutter and some of the data analysis tools he was using to take a look at missions. I'm really interested to see what that looks like, here in a handful of months or so, and if missions are still going to be similarly clumped or if they're going to be fairly spread. And gut feeling is that these are going to be fairly different requirements, pretty substantially. Not across the board. Like, there are some that line up, but yeah, very interesting stuff.
Yeah. And then the other big thing at the season that we just got was the re-edition of a lot of the out-of-print sectorials that were removed at the start of N5. And that's a huge thing, especially when taken in with the new season packet and everything being different. We still are missing Spiral Core, where they're not going to come back, and we're missing Foreign Company because most of that got folded into White Company. But we got Starco, Merovingia, Caledonia, Neoterra, Varuna, and Acontecimiento all came back. And it's been really cool glancing through these because unlike in the past where, and I think we kind of expected it would be similar where, okay, they're adding them back in and it's going to be, you know, maybe a little update here and there, but it's going to be kind of the same old sectorials. And, you know, they didn't necessarily get a lot of updates in comparison to other things over the years because they were out of print. And,
Mm-hmm.
you know, they not to say that you couldn't do well with them, because obviously, I mean, I played Varuna when they weren't getting updates and did quite well with them. I played Foreign Company, did quite well with them. And, you know, of course, did fantastic with Merovingia year after year when they've been out of print the longest. Because very much, you know, player driven on that and your play skill and style. But you definitely had to know more what you're doing. They were less forgiving because they didn't have a lot of those updates. So we figured, oh, it's probably going to be something like that. No, this was wow, like full on updates, and they are on paper. So I have to get these to the table and see, but on paper, like they are, especially with the restricted design space of vanilla and some of the sectorials for N5, like they fit right in with that, and they are right on par with anything else, if not even have some of their own advantages. This was far beyond what I expected as far as updates. It's they're brand new sectorials at this point.
It feels like a pretty big shift. Like they still largely do what they did before, but they have a lot more tools now. At least that
Yes.
was kind of how I felt with my first game of Neoterra, where it's like it was definitely more than just a new coat of paint, like Ian was saying. Like I was not expecting that much of an update, but it was pretty wild to see.
Yeah. So
But
I'm super
yeah,
happy with that and excited to see these coming back to the table, because I think it's going to take a lot of players by surprise that are expecting, you know, if they faced off against some of these before and, you know, they think they know what to expect. I think it's going to be a big surprise when they see what these can do now.
yeah, definitely. There's so much to sift through, even just with the half a dozen sectorals. But this is like
Yeah.
a change almost on par with like a sectoral revamp, like
Mm-hmm.
similar, except more unit changes and no new units.
Yeah. But
But
man, there is
yeah,
some real tasty updates in some of the stuff. Just between new, you know, folding in all the new skills that come with N5, like Warhorse and Combat Instinct, and like the, you know, BS Attack -3, and all those different changes that came with N5. They fully utilized them into these sectorials, and it's really cool how some of this comes together on these models and profiles that are well loved but haven't necessarily been the strongest or most competitive for a while.
yeah, yeah, definitely.
But I mean, overall, I think between the change up in the ITS season and the new the old sectorials returning, it's a it's a new game. Like Infinity is different than it was 2 weeks ago. Like it is a new game, and I'm excited because it's all kinds of new stuff to mess with.
Yeah, it kind of feels like a quarter of an edition changeover almost. A
Yeah,
lot of big stuff.
I'm excited. It's gonna be cool.
Yeah. Well, before we wrap up with our final thoughts on our initial review of ITS 17, I did want to just take a moment to say thank you to all of our wonderful patrons who help support us and just kind of make things a little bit easier for us financially. Things like software subscriptions and equipment upgrades and various expenses like that. You guys help with that tremendously. So thank you very, very much for that. If you're able and willing to join, you can find us on patreon.com/metachemistry. And as a show of gratitude, we try and give a handful of benefits out to just say thank you. So things like final voting on polls. By now, we'll have seen the end of Ian's army poll. So we had our round one was the overall faction, which was open to anybody who wanted to participate. You just had to be a free member on the Patreon and can hit that. And then final round with our paid patrons. And So we'll do those periodically. We have early access to episodes, so you can hear them a week early and get those on our off weeks and things like that. So you also have some channels on the Discord that are patron specific. But otherwise, if that's not your cup of tea, feel free to join us on our Discord. It is otherwise, besides those couple channels, is a free and open community. We'd love to have you there. We're always happy to talk shop, whether you want to talk about the new sectorials or go over lists or speculate wildly on what's going to show up next or whatever the case may be. There's a spot for it on our Discord. So, with that said, Ian, final thoughts on ITS 17, The Seekers.
I'm excited. I like it. So it shakes it up, and we have a lot of new missions. Things play differently. I think it's going to be a really cool season to play. I like the season rules being stripped back to being the treasure hunters thing, everybody getting the Sacha, because that brings a lot of it back to earlier seasons that I really enjoyed, where you would have like access to a special unit that everybody could take. And at one point it was Scarface, and at another point it was what was the other one you could get? Doesn't matter.
There were the Boshies and the CSUs,
or like the Alive group that in the one season, like where everybody could take these units, and then the Sasha brings that back, but where you would get a bonus to one type of trooper, like the season where medium infantry all got forward deployment 4 inches, awesome, or the seasons where tags got extra damage and tactical awareness, because that's actually ended up getting folded into the main rules for tags. But those were really cool, and it said it was not a whole lot of extra stuff to keep track of. Like, is there a QAZ? Is there templates here? Is there these tokens and turrets and all this other stuff that we've been getting, which granted are cool, but have tended to get somewhat overwhelming with keeping track of all of the little moving parts on some of these. And now even we have these missions that are more complex, so they've stripped that stuff away from the season, and I think that's actually a super cool balance on there. So we have interesting missions that are generally more straightforward because you don't have to keep track of all this extra stuff, and I'm super excited for it. It reminds me of older seasons I really enjoyed, but very fresh because the missions are so cool and so new and different.
Yeah, I agree. I like that this season has been a season of risk taking on Corpus Belli's part. It's very drastic changes. The missions have shifted dramatically. Their design feels quite a bit different. Like you said, a big part of it is not having recurring fiddly bits effectively on certain missions. Like, there are no terrain zones. There are no pre-deployed turrets or QAZ creatures or other things that periodically appear in missions but are not season rules. I think that that's a good change, and this is a conversation that we've had before where I think that increases mental overhead fairly significantly, and it's one of those things where they would often either just be outright forgotten by players, or players would agree not to use them. So, which is not really where you want a special rule for a mission to be. Like, yes, players can kind of decide how they want to approach some of these things, but if players actively don't want to interact with those rules, that should be pretty telling. So I think that is really good. Like Ian said, the complexity lies in the mission itself and not with all the accoutrements that are around the mission. The missions feel more narrative and more unique, and I think that that's really cool. And you can tell that cutting down on missions really gave them a lot of room to push the limits further in those that actually ended up in the season, which I think is great.
Yeah.
I'm curious how some of these missions will work out, but I think that generally speaking, these are going to be very interesting missions. These are going to be fun shakeups. And I'm really curious if we're going to see a similar design ethos moving forward, where the seasons are going to be dramatically different from the previous, or if this is going to kind of become the new standard and then now we rotate 3 missions again like prior seasons.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
that'll be kind of interesting to see. I kind of, part of me likes having a stable of recurring missions
Mm-hmm.
because that just helps with retention. There's some things that, you get that familiarity. You can play something with a newer player and be fairly confident that it will show up season over season. And maybe that's just going to be direct action. But
Yeah.
maybe some of these will be kind of long-term stand-ins. We'll see.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I would love to hear your thoughts on season 17. So feel free to either comment on Spotify or stop on our Discord or wherever you want to reach out to us. Let us know what your thoughts are. What's your favorite mission? What's your least favorite mission? And we'll be looking forward to hearing from you. And on behalf of Metachemistry, this has been Devin
And Ian, and that's the meta.